Should you unlock the 4th skill on Sargon the Great, or should you just leave him at 5550? We did 3 hours of testing to bring you a definitive answer to this question, and I was honestly very surprised by everything that we learned. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and Sargon the Great has been a hotly debated commander. Some people think you shouldn't even invest in him at all. Others think that a 5550 is the way to go. And still more, like myself, we're advocating for going all the way to expertise if and only if you're building a 2nd or 3rd infantry march. Otherwise, don't even work on him at all. And I wanted to find out for sure what the correct answer was, as far as we could learn anyways, for what the heck you're supposed to do with Sargon. So in this video, I want to do the following things. First and foremost, I want to explain very briefly why it is you would keep him at 5550 without even unlocking this 4th skill. From there, I want to talk about our test methodology and show you the results. And then we'll get into the conclusion, which again, I was honestly surprised. Now, if you like Rise of Kingdoms guides that help you get value and smash your enemies, consider subscribing to the channel for daily Rise of Kingdoms videos, and throw a like on the video. I really appreciate your support, especially when, like today, it took many hours of testing to get you this result. Let's first talk about 5550. The problem with the 4th skill on Sargon is that it is removing all of the stacks of odd that you've put onto the enemy. And it does a little bit of damage and a little bit of shielding, and it gives you a little bit of defense, by the way, all the time. Now, the stacks of odd make it so that your enemy can take an upwards of 30% skill damage. And if you don't even unlock this skill, then it will stay at 30% skill damage taken for as long as the odd debuffs are all stacked up on that enemy. If you unlock this skill, even with just 1 point, when you get to 10 stacks of odd, it clears the stacks off, does the damage, does the shielding, and you got to start all over, building up the skill damage taken. So the argument for not unlocking this skill is that not only is the effect fairly small, 500 damage factor, 150 shielding factor, but also keep in mind that you don't actually use marches in isolation. If you bring 5 to 7 marches in the open field and you're smashing something and you can keep a 30% skill damage taken debuff on the enemy, that is freaking massive. So the idea behind a 5550 is very simply that you get way more value by leaving the debuff onto the enemy than by doing the damage and the shield. Now, I lived in the camp of saying, I think you should unlock this skill. I think it's going to be better. And I also advocated for only investing in Sargon if you would take him to expertise. And it turns out that I think I was wrong a little bit in that estimation, because although taking him to expertise is, I think, the way to go, I actually also think a 5550 was way more viable than I realized. Now, I don't want to jump ahead too far yet into the results, but that's the main argument around should you unlock this skill or not. Now, people have already done the testing and proven, by the way, that the expertise version of Sargon is way more punchy than the not expertise version of Sargon. So if you were like, bro, should I have just stayed 5550? I think the expertise is still the better way to go. But is a 555 even a viable way to go? So in order to test this, here's what we did. We ran a bunch of tests in an Ark of Osiris practice match with equipment. I will show that to you in just a minute. And also with formations, because even though formations are not in regular Ark, they are in the practice matches for some reason. So you can practice with formations, which is kind of interesting. So we used equipment, we used formations, and we smashed 12 times recording the results. Okay. And then we did it with a 5551 Sargon. And then we did it with a 5553 Sargon just to see what the difference was, okay? Now, as far as the equipment that we used and the commanders that we used, I didn't want to have a result when we were testing that was like really heavily in my favor or their favor. So we found I'd call it a fairly even matchup. I used Nevsky with this gear, which is really good gear. I am missing 2 iconics, but it's a lot of crit cav gear. It's giving a lot of stats. And here are the formation and armaments that I've got lined up here. They're decent. This is my best cav set, okay? And it's pretty solid. Now, I'll put on the screen the equipment that Silver Sword used, and you'll notice that it's fully iconic, although missing crits compared to the set that I'm running. And also, here are the armaments that he's got and the stats that he's getting from this. So you can see that there is a pretty sizable difference in our equipment. However, because infantry counters cavalry, and because he's going to have a special unit, and because I took my city theme off, we end up with a pretty even result here. And I just want to mention one more time that the important thing here is not, does the Sargon combo that he used win? And he, by the way, is going to use Skippy Sargon. But the question is, how does the result change on average when we go from using Skippy Sargon at 5550 to a 5551 to a 5553? We're looking at the difference in these results. I keep everything about my account the same. Silver Sword kept everything about his account the same, except he just changed his Sargon. That's the only change between each round of testing. Now, in order to arrive at a conclusion we could support with like actual numbers, what we did is we took the Sev wounds inflicted to Silver Sword, the Sev wounds inflicted on me, and subtract them from each other. And we took an average of that, basically the differential. How much Sev wounds did I win by every single time we did one of these fights, okay? And we took an average of those numbers. And we did this test a bunch of times. As I mentioned, just to prove to you, we were working with a 5553. We also had, as I mentioned, a 5551. And last but not least is the 5550. So I just wanted to prove to you that we did, in fact, do all of these things. These numbers are not made up. And we ran a lot of tests here. 12 tests per, configuration of Sargon, all right? Let me show you these results. Okay, here we are in the table of results. And you've heard me say in many videos that anytime you look at like one or two reports, you need to be extremely cautious to assume that that represents the average situation. It might, and it might not, because you can see in one of these tests, I did not win by much at all. I won by less than 4,000 Sev wounds. And in some of these rounds, I won by as much as 10,000 Sev wounds with an overall average differential. In other words, I won by an average of 6,651 Sev wounds at a 5550. But surprisingly, when we took it to 5551, we got these results, and I won by more. In other words, unlocking the fourth skill on Sargon made the result worse. And it made it 18.33% worse. Now, really, we don't have statistical significance to 2 decimal places, and we may not even have achieved statistical significance at all. So the better play is probably to even just call this 18%, all right? About 18% better, or rather, better for me, worse for them. In other words, don't unlock the last skill on Sargon if you can't expertise him, which was a really surprising conclusion, because not only, by the way, did it make Sargon's result worse, but also think about the fact that in a murder ball, you bring 5+ marches potentially, which means that all those other marches also aren't benefiting from the constant uptime of 30% skill damage, because now you are removing the stacks of odd. So this is an overwhelming result in favor of a 5550, just to be clear. I think this is a very strong indicator that 5550 is the way to go, and upgrading to the last skill of Sargon is actually bad, which I found surprising. Your result is literally worse, not only for your march, but your whole murder ball. But then we thought, hey, what if you unlock more skills on Sargon? And so now we've got a 5553. And finally, we actually got an improvement ever so slightly with an average differential of 6,639 Sev wounds. In other words, by 0.18%, we've improved our results. In other words, even a 5.553 Sargon is not good enough. This was very surprising to me. I was really shocked at how little the extra points did here, which, by the way, is a very strong indicator that you should not unlock the 4th skill on Sargon unless you are going to take him to expertise. Because if you unlock the 4th skill on Sargon, you will actually get a worse result, which I found, again, extremely surprising. Not only for your march, the one march that Sargon's in, but all the marches in your murder ball now aren't doing as much skill damage because you're removing the debuff from the enemy yourself. So even a 5.553 Sargon is not a good call. 5.550 or go to the expertise. Now, the other thing that we need to appreciate for a moment is that, yeah, sure, Silver Sword in this instance is using, a special unit advantage, but he doesn't have crits on his gear. My armaments are really good. And can we just appreciate that? Yeah, I mean, I won the fights, but not by much. Can we appreciate that for a moment? What I'm trying to say is that a 5.550 Sargon is actually way better than I thought it would be. I wasn't sure if we would get a close result if he used Skippy with a 5.550 Sargon and I'm using Nevsky Joan, right? Like, I was not sure that that was going to be the case. But 5.550 Sargon was better than I thought. Now, in terms of where I would prioritize Sargon, I still think he's a second march at best, in my opinion. Maybe some people will argue he's a first march, but I couldn't, in my eyes, get rid of Skippy with Guan. Guan primary, Skippy secondary. If you're making only one infantry march, I think that's where it's at. But if you're making 2 infantry marches, now we can talk about bringing Sargon in. And I still kind of feel like he's maybe at best the 3rd strongest infantry commander or 4th strongest infantry commander. I guess what I'm trying to say overall is that if you bring lots of marches to the open field, or you're often hitting things that other people also hit, the 5.550 Sargon actually slaps. And it's better than any number of skills on the 4th skill, unless you actually go for the expertise. And I was really surprised by that result. Now, as I mentioned, this testing took 3 hours to do, and it actually was over the course of like 6 hours of talking and executing. So a big thank you again to Silver Sword. I really appreciate your help. And if you could do me the huge favor of throwing a like on the video as a way of giving me a thumbs up and Silver Sword a thumbs up for spending all this time testing, I would really appreciate it. I think it was super worth it. And the result, extremely insightful. And if you have more information about Sargon the Great that you would want to share, definitely let me know down below in the comments. But if you want to see more testing with this commander and how good he is, and an overall commander guide with talents and other recommendations for pairings, those 2 videos will be in the end screen in just a second, here and here.